And welcome! Spongebob Squarepants The Yellow Avenger for me is a very interesting game. It was one of my earliest PSP games that I owned. I remember it being a simple and easy game, and yet, for some reason, I never completed it. And when I inevitably moved my PSP library to all digital with the PSP Go, I was never able to play it again. But that was before I knew the marvels of backups, and now that I can play it on whatever PlayStation Portable I want, I wanted to see why I put it down all those years ago. Today's video is sponsored by 16-Bit Store. If you're looking for a one-stop shop for a replacement stylus for your Nintendo DS and 3DS systems, why not visit the 16-Bit Store? We've designed and 3D printed our own styluses from the original Nintendo DS all the way to the new Nintendo 3DS. So if you're in the market for a replacement stylus, why not visit the 16-Bit Store today? And if you use offer code 16BitReview on Etsy, you'll get 15% off your order when you buy 2 items or more. On the surface, and from what I can remember, The Yellow Avenger appears to be a simple 2D platformer, starring SpongeBob like his other Game Boy handheld outings. However, after going through the game's tutorial, I found that platforming to be quite shallow from what I was expecting. The platforming is simple and has a very nice and laid-back pace to it. By itself, it's fun, but I found it to grow quite monotonous after backtracking through various areas over and over and over again as I go through the game completing objectives. To make the game more interesting, the developers added enemies to fight, but I see them more as obstacles rather than a challenge to overcome. Honestly, the game really doesn't incentivize combat at all, since collecting the dirty bubbles, which is your reward for defeating an enemy, just makes the temporary power-ups that you receive throughout the game last a little longer after the timer runs out. And I just found it more fun and entertaining to just avoid enemy encounters altogether, finding a way to chain jumping through enemies just so that I can move on to the next area. Now, normally to alleviate this problem, a 2D platformer would introduce new power-ups, more difficult enemies, or something to just keep your interest as you're playing the game. But the Yellow Avenger just doesn't do that. Every once in a while it introduces an enemy that's a little bit bigger, harder to avoid, or maybe can't even be attacked at all. But that laid-back platforming is still there, and it doesn't change as you're playing through the game. Add to that the consistent lack of checkpoints, and as a platformer, it's passable to play for a few minutes at a time, but can become quite tiresome after a while. And yet, as I'm playing through this game, wishing it was a little bit better, I have troubles putting the game down, at least for a while. And I feel that's because Spongebob Squarepants The Yellow Avenger isn't a 2D platformer at its heart, but instead it has more in common with its PC adventure games. When you start looking at The Yellow Avenger as a point-and-click adventure game, somehow the boring 2D platformer elements just melts away, and you can start enjoying the world that this game does try to build. Despite being in 2D, this rendition of Bikini Bottom is filled to the brim with familiar locales and places, and due to the game's small level size, it's very easy to remember where everything is, or to find someone inside the world. And when you do find someone, you can start to feel the flow of this adventure game, talking to characters, getting quests, exploring an area, unlocking rewards, and when you complete enough quests, you get to progress in the story with a boss fight. Now, I wouldn't expect a lot from the story here. It is, of course, a simple story for a simple game, but for a SpongeBob licensed game, it doesn't feel out of place. The dialogue doesn't feel out of left field, and the characters sound just right. The only complaint that I have about this game's story is just the way it's presented. It's a text-only game, which feels out of place for the PSP, but makes sense when you realize that the game is also available on the Nintendo DS. I feel the PSP version should have a little more to it, but what's here isn't that bad. And what I feel ties this whole game together is the game's aesthetics. The game looks and sounds good, like other SpongeBob games from the time. And when you look past some of the more unpleasant models like Patrick and Squidward, the game looks and sounds like a SpongeBob cartoon, just in 3D. And the game's music fits quite well with the game's more relaxing nature. And yet, there's just something which I feel holds back Yellow Avenger from being a good SpongeBob game, at least for myself. And normally when it comes to a bad licensed games, it's usually an obvious fault. Here's a distracting bug, or shallow gameplay. But with the Yellow Avenger, I feel that it's more death by 1,000 paper cuts than one glaringly bad issue. Sure, the gameplay is simplistic, but it's not bad. And yeah, the quests are lackluster, being mostly fetch, but it's not the end of the world. Yeah, the game's movement is slow, but its levels are also small. And yeah, what you do in the game is mostly busy work, but it's to character. But add all that together with lackluster combat, minimum rewards, and I can absolutely see why my younger self didn't feel obligated to go and at least try to finish this game. Which I feel is a shame. On the surface, SpongeBob Squarepants The Yellow Avenger looks and feels like a well-polished good game, but play it long enough and its issues and frustrations start to pile on and eventually drag down the entire experience. I'm not saying that Yellow Avenger is a bad game, but I am certainly played better games from both the PSP and from SpongeBob. For the game's price, it's not a bad option to go and pick up. But from the way it looks, I think the DS version might be the better platform to get the Yellow Avenger on. If you want to get the PSP version, it's not a bad option, and it's definitely interesting, but I feel there are better SpongeBob games to play on it. But anyways, thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you have yourself a good day, and as always, take care.